Hola a todas y todos. Estamos en la última charla de la Expo de este año y estamos con Edward González, quien es lingüista, es profesor de la licenciatura en Letras Inglesas y además es poeta. Edward, te dejamos el espacio para que hagas tu presentación y estamos en contacto por si salieran preguntas, comentarios acerca de lo que nos vas a exponer. Y al finalizar tu presentación, yo también le voy a comentar a nuestra audiencia acerca de los cambios que se nos vienen para la malla a partir del próximo año.
Perfecto, parece bien. Gracias por esa introducción. Como dice Loreto, yo soy Edward González, llevo unos 11 años en la facultad y también tengo mi lado B como poeta. I'm going to give my presentation in English because this is a class in English, so if any questions come up, please do so, and I'm happy to. I'm going to go ahead and present in English. Here. So I teach an OPR, I teach an OPU, okay, an elective course, common myths in language use. What's that all about? Okay. Today we're gonna play a very simple game of true and false. Now, a little bit of background. It's 2005 and I'm an undergraduate at university and I walk into my first linguistics class and I sit down and the professor is talking about language and how language works. Open up the book and the first page, there are 17 statements, right? 17 phrases about things that people think about language. And I thought, wow, this is it. This is the book that's going to give me some of the answers that I want out of language, how language works. Based on that initial feeling, I ended up actually studying linguistics as a science. And little by little, I started noticing that there seems to be a gap between what people believe about language and how language actually works. So I developed a course over the last few years trying to show in a very kind of pop linguistics way basic aspects of linguistics, basic aspects of attitudes and beliefs that people have about language, and what the science of linguistics says about it, right? Whether it's linguistics at the syntax level or linguistics more as a social phenomenon. So we're going to play a little bit of true and false. I'm going to show you a statement, and you can silently to yourself decide if it's true or false, and then I'll give you some background. First statement, okay? See here, while language change is inevitable, we need to avoid letting words lose their original meaning. Is that true or is that false? Now, we know the language changes. Nobody debates that anymore, right? But should we let kind of those definitions slide away or should we try to preserve? Now, I'm going to go with false, right? Original meanings, right? That's a tricky subject, right? There's a concept called the etymological fallacy, where we think that the original meaning of a word is the true meaning. Language changes, meanings change. Inevitable as well. Let me give you a couple of examples. The case of nice and fudge. Now, when you're thinking of nice, you're thinking of, Friday afternoon. And when you're thinking of fudge, you're thinking of, that delicious chocolate syrup that you put on your various sweets. Well, they have very different origins. You can see here over the last few thousand years, the word nice has gone massive trajectory of change, right? We are nowhere near where we were at the beginning of the word, right? The word started out as actually meaning kind of stupid, okay? And it comes from the idea of nescere, okay? Ne, not, and scere, to cut, right? This is where we get the word scissors, right? So not scissors, can't cut it, right? Not the sharpest tool in the shed, as we say in English. Okay, think about the word in Spanish, necio, right? And you start to see the connection between nice, necio, innocent mind, right? Naive. Okay, so little by little, this word has improved in meaning, right? From stupid to maybe a little bit shy, to maybe a little bit fussy, maybe delicate in the way you behave, okay, then more precise for like nice delicacies, right? Nice agreements, right? And overall agreeable, and finally, here we are. Nice, it's likable, right? Huge change over thousands of years. Which of these is the true meaning? Well, they all are, right? Depending on where we are in history, the meaning changes. Okay, so nice started to mean something very bad and it became something very good. The technical term for this is amelioration, ameliorate, to get better. So good news for nice. In the case of fudge, okay, when we think of fudge, we think of the syrup, but again, very different origin. I'll read you a little bit from this text, right? If you lived 200 years ago, right, in the 1790s, and you were prone to drama, you'd loudly proclaim something you considered a lie as fudge. We still have that, right? This idea of fudging the facts, okay? The earlier meaning is thought to be inspired by, of course, Captain Fudge, right? So there is such a person as Captain Fudge, right? A dishonest seafarer or sailor. Okay? It wasn't until a little bit over 100 years ago that the meaning in the United States started to change, right, and being associated with this idea of candy. But we still have some traits, right, some remnants of the original idea of lies and falsehood. When we talk about something like fudge the fact, fudge the facts, to fudge the figures, needs to kind of alter them in a dishonest way. Okay, so two huge changes in words that we think we know the meanings of. Second comment, right, second idea here, okay? Children learn languages mainly by imitating what they hear around them at first, poorly, but they get better, right? And we think, of course, I say a word and the kid repeats the word and we say, well, that's what's happening, right? They're like little parrots. Well, not quite. It's a little bit more complex, right? I'm gonna go with false on this one as well, okay? What makes us think that children are not just imitating? Well, they say novel things like more outside and all gone sticky, okay? So they produce language that has never been heard by them before. Right? Nobody says more outside, nobody says all gone sticky. How are the children saying these phrases? Okay, where is that phrase coming from? And it seems that there's something going on in the brain. There seems to be some kind of inherent structure, what we call some kind of innate grammar, or at least a learning mechanism that helps them negotiate language and negotiate meaning. A second reason that we know is because of the famous WUG test. You may have heard about it, okay? Basically, you take these little kids as we see there, and you take some prototypical scientists, and you show them a WUG, and this is a WUG. Hi, guys, look, there's a little WUG. It's cute, it flies, whatever properties we give it. We have two of these things. What do we say? One WUG, two, and then you leave that space for the child to answer the question. And what do kids say? WUGs, as you can see there. Where does that S come from? They've never learned the word WUG. It's not a real word, okay? And that's not just the only word we've used. We've used gajuba, So here's one gajuba, and there's two gaju, and kids naturally say gajubas or WUGs or whatever other made-up word. Where are they getting that plural suffix? They're getting it from here, right? They've understood, they've navigated the environment, and they figured out a kind of algorithm or simulation of how language works. Well, it's not really imitation, right? It's simulation. If you keep one thing from today, don't imitate, simulate. Make your own kind of perspective on how language works. Children are novel language creators, not just imitators. A final phenomenon that leads us to think that children know more about language than merely imitation is called the FIS phenomenon, right? Yeah, you heard it correctly. It's FIS, not fish. FIS. You get this little kid here, and they're saying, no, it's my FIS. Right? Where does this come from? Well, about 60 years ago, they ran some experiments. And children were saying fist, 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 and showing you their little fish. But if you repeat the word back to me, oh, what color is the fist? The child would get distraught, frustrated. I didn't say fist, I said fist. Okay, and you're starting to wonder, well, you're saying the same word, right? But then the experimenter started to say the word correctly. Oh, so what color is your fish? The child would respond, my fist is yellow, my fist is orange. Okay, so clearly what that says is the child understands the word fish, but they can't articulate it, right? So comprehension precedes production, as I'm sure anybody who's learned the language has experienced. So the FIS phenomenon tells us that children know more than they're able to produce. So there's internal mechanisms at work. Third one, a big one, right? Chileans speak a poor version of Spanish. Hablamos re mal, right? Okay, I'm not Chilean, I'm Cuban by birth and lived many years in the United States, but I've lived here so long that I feel kind of an honorary Chilean, right? And kind of to complicate things, right? American English isn't as faithful to English's origins as British English. I put these two phrases together to make you question each other, right? Maybe alone you think yes or no, but together you kind of start to doubt and you say, well, it's probably not true. So let's go with false with this one as well. Why? What makes us think that Chileans perhaps don't speak such a full version of Spanish and American English has nothing to do with the faithfulness of English's origins? Well, I can tell you a couple of things. One of them is a fantastic book by the linguist from Universidad de Chile, Rojas, right? ¿Por qué los chilenos hablamos como hablamos? And in that book, he makes it a point to explain kind of the origins of these ideas, right? These language ideologies, the way that people perceive how a language behaves in society. Okay, and what he says there is basically we have certain presuppositions, certain assumptions about what language should be and how close this Latin American version should be the original version, right? But again, the original version is a tricky concept, right? Even in Spain, there are many dialects of Spanish, right? So clearly we're all under this kind of umbrella of what we call the standard language, right? Major countries, right, major nation states make it a point in their life to create a kind of standard language and that represents the country, right, represents them internationally, right? So you're exporting English, you're exporting Spanish. And the idea here is that the standard language is perhaps influencing the way that we see variation. In language, the only constant is variation, not standard. Standard is something idealized that we've come up with, right? So it's a great read, and I recommend kind of diving into it to understand that really there's nothing wrong with Chilean Spanish or any other kind of Spanish, right? Variation is the norm. I think if you've seen the movie Ratatouille, there's a moment in the movie where the father shows him the dead rats. Spoiler alert! And he says to Remy, he says, "You can't change your nature." Okay, and Remy responds and says, "Nature is change, right? So language is going to change, and change creates variation." Okay, and there you can actually click on these, right? These are clickable. I'm going to make this available for you at a later date. Whole presentation. So click on the images and you'll get links. So there you have a viewpoint. About 10 years ago, this article came out. Obviously, it's very skewed, right? Why do some Americanisms irritate people? And many people are irritated by Americanisms, right? Like triple and double and physicality and incentivize. It's kind of buzzwords. But what we're really going on here is kind of a brand identity, right? Just as Mac and Windows compete, right? So do variations of language, right? Which one's better, American English or British English, right? Well, there's no clear answer to that. And going back to the original problem, okay, the idea of faithfulness to an origin is quite suspect as well, right? Variation is the key. American English is its own thing, and it doesn't need to report back to its parent language, right? British English has also changed in the last 400 years. It spawned its American counterpart. 4, dictionaries are prescriptive instruments which dictate word meanings and uses. Okay, is that true or false? Well, we open up a dictionary, esa palabra existe? Does that word exist? Well, I don't know. Let's check the dictionary. Right? This is the typical thing. But we have a series of assumptions there. First of all, we have the assumption that there is a dictionary, right, rather than many, right? And the other assumption we have is that this dictionary is kind of this entity, right, that doesn't have people behind it. But that's quite opposite to reality. We have people behind it. Okay? People write dictionaries. Okay, so let's change that phrase a little bit. Let's go with false, and let's change the phrase to something a bit more accurate, right? Which is dictionaries are descriptive instruments which capture word meanings and uses. What does that mean? Descriptive versus prescriptive. Okay, prescriptive, you're trying to say what you should do, what you ought to do, and dictate means that you're saying, okay, do this. Descriptive means let's look at the world, let's see how things behave, right? Let's see how things interact and try to derive kind of behavior, kind of psychology. Okay? And capture is basically just record, right? So dictionaries, more than being kind of these instruments for how to do something, it's more of an instrument, it's more of a snapshot of the language, right? Every dictionary, when it comes out, it's obsolete. Thankfully, now we have the internet, and dictionaries are being updated and actualized on a regular basis. In her talk, the professor and linguist Anne Kurzan, right, from the University of Michigan, she gives a great talk about this, and you can click on that link as well. And she basically says, she explains a little bit about the human hands behind dictionaries. And the idea is that people vote on definitions, right? You have a committee, you have a panel, and this panel votes on certain definitions. Every year, words are submitted for voting, okay? And a group of experts, right, linguists, writers, journalists, and various other ambits get together and decide, should this word be in the dictionary? But the reality of a word doesn't depend on its being in a dictionary, right? Words are real or not, independent of whether they are recorded. Most languages don't record their words. Dictionaries are in their heads. This seems to have a very strong influence on a society, though, right? Societies with dictionaries do have bigger vocabulary, okay? Because they don't have to have all the words in their head. They can keep the words. How are we doing on time? Okay, the fifth. People make mistakes such as confusing it's and it's, there, and there, and because they're inattentive and lazy, likely a result of falling educational standards. Well, again, we're setting up a pattern here, right? The first four have been false, so likely this is going to be false as well. Okay, and this is absolutely the case. Well, it's true. We do make these mistakes. We do make mistakes of it's and it's when we're texting or when we're writing. Okay, I've seen it all over the internet, and I've received many texts with the error. Okay, but as you can see, if you close your eyes and say those words, they sound the same. Okay, so here we have a kind of collapse of sound, phonology or phonetics. What's the real reason? What's going on? First of all, there's a great article here by David Sherad Madari, okay, from The Guardian, and he basically makes an argument, right? And he's not the only one, but he makes an argument that basically error is the way the language changes. Just as your DNA changes by making little mistakes and little mutations about your history and throughout the history of a species, language, if you think of it as a kind of species, also changes by little tiny mutations, right? Little sounds change over time, little by little. This is how you get respalat becoming resfalat, right? Little changes over time. Many of them are erroneous and some of them stick. Okay, so I recommend you read this article too. It's 8 little pronunciation problems. One of the examples is the letter N. Okay, N kind of moves around the language, right? You never quite know if it's going to stick or not. As you can see, in English, we have l'orange, orange, right? This orange thing is delicious. It's also a color. In Spanish, naranja. What's going on? Where does that end? Okay, adder, apron, and umpire all used to start with an N. Okay, constructions like an adder, okay, or my neighbor, were so common, the first letter was assumed to be part of the preceding word. We call this rebracketing, and it makes us think about the word nickname. What is a nickname? Okay, I'm going to leave you in suspense. That's going to be your homework for later. Look up the origin of nickname, and you'll realize that that N probably shouldn't be there. Another issue with the language, right? Another issue why we make these errors, right? There, is because of ambiguity, right? Language is very redundant, but it's also necessarily ambiguous. Okay, one string, one phrase that we say can have many possible meanings, right? And there are many different kinds of ambiguity. Okay, the classic loquito por ti, loco loco, loquito por ti, loco loco, okay, por ti por ti. This idea is obviously I'm crazy about you, but I also place and replace, take and put. Okay, and these sound the same. So if you just close your eyes, you can hear that they sound absolutely the same. This creates confusion, this creates ambiguity. Okay, and this changes the way that a language works. Okay, some early computer programs, right? You put in a phrase, and these two phrases are equivalent in a way. Spirit is a vodka is a kind of spirit. Willingness is agreeableness, okay, and flesh and meats are quite similar, right? So you can see how a computer would have problems. This is why machine learning and artificial intelligence haven't quite figured out the language problem yet. And as you can see there, I saw bats. You have many possibilities, right? Or the classic yama, yama, yama. Okay, these kinds of things. So language has a kind of ambiguity. And there's one kind of really interesting error, right, called the eggcorn. This comes from the acorn, right? Trees. Okay, but acorn, if you pronounce it acorn, 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 you can kind of generate this false pronunciation. Eggcorn. What are eggcorns? Eggcorns are phrases that are very similar to the original one, but somehow the range were changed in a way and still makes a kind of sense. Okay. So the answer, my friends, right? That's what happened to the famous Bob Dylan lyrics, right? The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind, blowing in the wind. Well, misheard lyrics. Okay, so an acorn also yields a hippopotamus instead of a hippopotamus, right? Because b and p generated in the same part of the mouth. And well, hippopotamuses have, big behinds. Okay, and I can't really explain a microwave, but let's say those two words, microwave, 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 microwave. See, very similar. Okay, these little kinds of similarities, these little kinds of ambiguities create language change. Okay? And finally, my friend, calling mac and cheese monkey cheese. Well, and no reason why they can't, right? And click on this to see the GIF or the GIF, as they say. Now, a bit more controversial, right? Deeper one that many people study in anthropology, right? It's this idea of linguistic relativity. It is absolutely true. Languages express the same idea in very different ways. What do we do with that, right? Now, up to that point, there is no controversy, right? Languages are very different from each other and they express ideas and concepts in a very different way. But linguistic relativity doesn't have to mean that we are in these kinds of boxes, in these traps, in these jail cells of language, right? These prison houses, they say, or straitjackets. We're going to go with false, not because there isn't relativity, relativity abounds, but because it doesn't really affect your worldview. I'll give you some really basic examples of that. As you can see, in English, you have the word you, and in Spanish, we have 4 versions of the word. Okay? We can cut that vosotros one out. Okay, but we have vos. Okay. Does that mean that somehow my worldview in English is different because I don't pay linguistic attention to the subtleties between tú, usted, vosotros, y ustedes? I find that very suspect. And if you flip the script and you look from English to Spanish, are Spanish speakers less aware that haber can be plural or singular, that there can be many things or one thing? And are you less cognizant of the idea that making and doing are 2 different things? You're not. You always understand your language doesn't represent that linguistically. You don't say those things. Really, you can perceive. Okay, so experience is always something larger than expression. We express things differently. We experience things in a very, very similar way because we're all human. Finally, when you look at this example, you realize how ridiculous it is, right? In Spanish, we have only su, okay? And this generates errors like your, their house, your house. Okay, but neither Spanish nor English are less attuned to you, your, her, or their. We have the same level of attention. We simply don't represent that linguistically. 7. Texting or text speak has had an overall negative effect on how people, and on the attention paid to proper grammar, punctuation, and spelling. Well, if you've been keeping up for the last 20 minutes, you realize that this is also going to be false, right? Well, why is it false? Well, when we think of the internet, we think of things like, okay, maze, fro, wow, very art, so paint, much PBS, many happy. Okay, so we think, oh, the internet is just evolving language, it's ruining everything. Well, not so fast. Okay, there is a linguist, right, Gretchen McCullough, and she writes prolifically about it. She's got a book that came out, I think, last year or 2 years ago, which I give it a strong recommend because internet, right? So because of the internet, because internet. And she actually analyzes, right, the grammar of Dogue. Dogue, believe it or not, has a grammar, right? It's not standard English, but it's a kind of English. It's Dogue English, right? Okay, and there's even one little excerpt from the article, right, that you can click on here. Friend 1 says, Dogue is a rescue dog, much respect, so noble. Wow. And the friend 2 says, hey, man, you're dogging, too coherent, much noble, so respect. There is a grammar. If you can make a mistake in a language, the language has a grammar. 8. There's only one true version of a language. Dialects similar to it are deformations, right? We have the ideal, right? If you got there's a box of all the different Spanishes and you got to stick your hand in that box and take out a Spanish. Only one, right? There's the best Spanish, right? Isn't that true? It's tricky. Again, we've talked a little bit about this already, okay? But it's tricky to say that one true version. Clearly, advanced societies with lots of literature generate a standard, right, that represents a portion of the community. That standard is an ideal, an abstraction. It's not real. Let's go with false. I'll show you this very simple diagram, right? Here you have 2 standards, right? The Dutch, in their infinite wisdom, have created a standard Dutch, and the Germans as well. But if you look down on the ground, right, away from the standard, away from academia, you go down there and you see that the way that these languages interact is a lot more close to each other than we suspect. Yes, if you speak standard Dutch and you speak standard German, maybe the communication will not be ideal. You speak one of these dialects that borders the nation. You have something like Portuñol. They have a kind of Dutch-German mix. Languages mix with each other. Right? The standards are different. They're the peak. Mountains connect ways that we don't always perceive. The final comment that I want to leave you with, right, and we've been building up to this, right, writing, while fundamental to the world we live in, is not essential to a language's existence, spread, or health, true or false. And here, right, if you've been keeping up, right, all of them have been false, but this one, I'm going to leave you with true. Why? Why is it true? Why is it true that writing, even though it's awesome and necessary for the way we live now, it's not essential to a language's well-being? Well, here's a clock. And I'm going to steal this idea from Professor John McWhorter from Columbia University. And he has this interesting way of looking at it. He says, if you think of language, the history of language as existing in one day, 24 hours, writing came to that party at 11:07 p.m., 53 minutes before the end of the day. That means that in the span, the entire history of language, a small snippet of that spoken universe of language has been written, maybe 6,000 years. Okay, so at least 150,000 years of spoken language, 5,000 to 6,000 years of written language. And not only that, but there are thousands of languages in the world, and only a select 100 of those are written down in any meaningful way. In terms of spread of languages, right, most of them are oral, and in terms of history of languages, most of them we've been speaking language much more than we've been writing language. Okay, so after I've given you those 9 kind of statements, right, hopefully I've kind of piqued your interest in some of these controversies. I want to leave you with 5 basic ideas about language to kind of get your gears running, get that gerbil spinning in that wheel. Okay, the first thing that I want to mention, right, language is growth, not made, right? On the left, we have kudzu, which grows and grows and grows. And on the right, we have clock, right? So kudzu or clock. Language is more like kudzu, right? It's self-regulating, right? If parts go missing, it still works, right? If you take one gear out of that clock, everything falls apart. Kudzu can grow and be cut and be severed and continue to thrive. So language kind of grows, right? The philosopher Alan Watts talks about, in Chinese philosophy, you have this idea of growing rather than being made. Don't come from clay, we are kind of soil. Okay, so language is grown. We all grow it together, right, as a kind of collective system. Okay, language is also analog and digital, right? So it's continuous, right, like that standard German and standard Dutch example, right? So we have these peaks, we have these little circles, these discrete colors of language. We have French, we have Italian, we have Spanish. They're different, feed into each other as well. Right? So even though they are discrete entities, there's a lot that they have in common, and there's a lot of mutual intelligibility. A Portuguese speaker across the border in Portugal can speak to a Spanish speaker, and they can get along, no big deal. Language is negotiable, not set or determined. We talked about language change. Language will continue to change and has changed, and that seems to be the default of a language. So we can't kind of fix it. We can write a dictionary, we can write a style manual, we can write a book of grammar rules. All of those will shift and change and mutate over time. Every time we have a conversation, we negotiate meaning. Language is just one way consciousness expresses itself. Okay, so we are conscious entities. Some of that consciousness becomes a thought. This is, the iceberg of consciousness, and some of that thought becomes language. Okay, we're all conscious, we think a lot, and only a small subset of those thoughts ever get uttered. Okay, so clearly language and thought are not the same thing. Thought is what's going on in our heads. Language is one of the ways that we express that thought. We can express it pictorially, we can express it gesturally. There are many ways to express our thoughts. Language is but maybe the main and the best vehicle, but it's not the only vehicle. And the last thing I want to leave you with, guys, going back to kids, is you got to flip the script. Adults aren't children, been around a while. And this is what Alice and Cognix says. Instead of children being little mini adults, we're looking at language, we're looking at children and language development from the point of view of the adult. We should be looking at it from the point of view of the kid. Kids can't tie their shoes, they can't eat, they make a mess everywhere. They're linguistic geniuses. Let's pay attention to those geniuses and see how language evolves and is acquired by them. So thank you so much for listening. I hope this has kind of sparked your interest or augmented your interest in language. And I thank you again for letting me share this information.
Eduardo, entretenida tu charla. La verdad que me remonté a la época del colegio con el verdadero y falso. Lo encontré súper didáctico. Además que en español tenemos palabras que suenan igual y tienen un significado distinto, y en inglés influye mucho la pronunciación, ¿cómo se llama? También los acentos de las personas en la pronunciación, así que
no hay mucha variabilidad. Hay mucha variabilidad.
Muchas variables que influyen. Entonces, no sé si viene tan al caso, quizás es como más un chiste para amenizar esta conversación, pero seguramente has escuchado la canción de la que sale esa son Reebok o son Nike.
Ah, sí, claro. Son Reebok o son Nike. Oh, Nike. Sunlight. Ya, sí, no, sí, bueno, y todas las letras que la gente escucha mal, como que, o sea, el lenguaje más que todo es algo oral, es algo en nuestras mentes y algo que compartimos con otros seres lingüísticos. La escritura es algo relativamente nuevo y que se ha ido perfeccionando. Ya, hay mucho más que decir, pero ni siquiera la estandarización del lenguaje es algo mucho más nuevo. Estamos hablando de unos 200 años. Piensa que en el tiempo de Shakespeare no había un diccionario, no existía un diccionario en inglés. Tenía que buscar un diccionario en latín o un diccionario que comparaba el francés con palabras en inglés, entonces no existía. El diccionario salió en el 1755 en inglés con Samuel Johnson, right? Y eso fue un poquito después del diccionario francés, el diccionario italiano y el diccionario de la lengua española, que salió en los 1700 algo, en 1712. Es todo muy, muy nuevo, pero también nos hace creer que el lenguaje funciona de tal forma, y yo creo que es un poco más entretenido que eso. Nosotros como parlantes, tenemos el control del lenguaje, no le pertenece a la institución. La institución está ahí para ayudarnos a entender, ayudarnos a recopilar, ayudarnos a navegar un poco cosas más tricky, pero no podemos como externalizar la responsabilidad del lenguaje, es conocer.
Sí, súper dinámico, entretenido, pedagógico también tu charla. Así que
Ojalá que lo vean, ojalá que les sirva y que se animen para la clase. Es una clase de verdad, así que el primer semestre de todos los años la impacta. Así que nos vemos ahí.
Así que sí, tú también haces clases en los módulos de lengua inglesa, así que speaking
Yo hago
generalmente.
speaking, que es que la conversación académica, básicamente es conversar, pero con un toque más explícito, más organizado, poder cursar. Y hago una clase de contrastes entre el inglés y el español, y eso también es indispensable porque te das cuenta cuando comparas los dos idiomas cuáles son las cosas más universales sobre el idioma y de qué forma se parecen. También doy una clase de traducción inversa. Tenemos un programa de un magíster de traducción del inglés al español y yo hago el flip, yo traduzco del español al inglés, tanto literatura como cosas más técnicas. Así que hay una gama de cosas que los estudiantes pueden experimentar. Y también quiero destacar que el que quiera venir a una clase como oyente, bienvenido, o sea, que nos contacte y puede venir y ver una clase, ver una demo. Así que feliz de tener gente viendo lo que está pasando. Así que muchas gracias por esta oportunidad de compartir.
Sí, fantástico. También comentarles, a raíz de los cursos que tú dictas, comentarle a todos los que van a ver este video después o nos están viendo en este momento que a partir del próximo año Letras Hispánicas y Letras Inglesas experimenta un cambio en su malla. Los alumnos van a entrar a un plan común para ambas licenciaturas. El plan común abarca tanto la literatura como la lingüística, pero al segundo año van a poder optar. Si optan por la mención en literatura o en lingüística, y además van a poder optar por una trayectoria. Tenemos 3 trayectorias, una trayectoria que es profundizar en la mención que elijan, ya sea la literatura o la lingüística, explorar profesionalizante, experimentar salidas laborales dentro de los optativos que ofrece la facultad. Y, por ejemplo, ahí está el magíster en traducción, la edición y otras opciones que tenemos disponibles.
Tenemos un magíster en ILE, inglés como lengua extranjera. Profesores que ya están desempeñando como profesores de inglés y quieren como profesionalizarse un poco más, es una opción también.
Exactamente. Y la tercera opción es la interdisciplina, que es explorar en otras facultades cursos eh, más específicos relacionados con nuestra disciplina, con las letras. Tengo entendido que está psicología, historia y no recuerdo la tercera, y como estamos recién partiendo, está como todavía, esas son las opciones, pero seguramente una vez que vaya avanzando la malla y los estudiantes vayan decidiendo esta mención, lo más probable es que se vaya ampliando esta posibilidad.
Sí.
Así que
Sí, yo creo que uno va definiendo lo que quiere, ¿no? Mi pregrado yo estudié lo que es kinesiología acá, así que nada que ver con lingüística, y me interesa por la lingüística. Así que hay que probar muchas cosas y mientras más clases tomas, más conexiones vas viendo, vas haciendo estas asociaciones entre conocimiento. Así que lo físico con lo mental también se conecta. Bienvenidos todos.
Así que quedan abiertos para que nos contacten, para consultas, también si están interesados en a lo mejor ver la posibilidad de asistir a una clase remota. También
Sería fantástico.
la universidad se está abriendo a que las clases, ojalá de aquí a final de año, tengan más opciones de actividades presenciales, así que ahí también se puede coordinar si alguien quiere asistir o tiene preguntas más particulares a cómo comunicarse contigo. En nuestra página web están disponibles los correos, también por redes sociales se responden consultas.
Sí, mándame un correo, yo feliz. Y como digo, tengo un lado B poeta y hago un taller 2 veces al mes sobre la poesía y lectura en general, también remota por Zoom, que empezó por la pandemia. Que esté interesado en eso me puede contactar y bienvenido a venir a escuchar o compartir literatura también. En inglés o español, porque los dos.
Gracias, Edward, por tu apertura a la audiencia, que ojalá se definan por letras para el próximo año.
Ojalá.
Así, nosotros cerramos nuestro ciclo de charlas. Agradecemos a todas y todos, los profesores y también los estudiantes que van a mirar nuestras charlas, y nos estaremos viendo pronto.